My name is Sophie, I'm 42 years old, and my husband of 15 years ended our marriage over the phone to tell me he just received an $800 million inheritance. Before I tell you how he ended up collapsing in a designer store just 3 days later, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. It all started on a Tuesday. A completely ordinary, mind-numbingly normal Tuesday. I was at my desk at a mid-sized accounting firm in the city, surrounded by the comforting, orderly world of spreadsheets and financial statements. The air smelled faintly of coffee and recycled paper. Outside my window, life went on in its usual rhythm. For me, life was about rhythm. It was about predictability, logic, and the quiet satisfaction of a balanced ledger. Numbers don't lie. People do. I just didn't know how much. For 15 years, my steady salary, my safe job, had been the bedrock of our life, the foundation upon which my husband, Richard, had built his many, many castles in the sky. My phone buzzed, vibrating against a stack of invoices. It was Richard. I smiled, a small, automatic gesture. I assumed he was calling to check in, maybe to complain about a client or pitch me his latest can't-miss idea. Our marriage had become a rhythm of its own, his chaotic energy, my steadying calm. "Hey," I answered, my voice cheerful, the sound of a woman who still believed she was part of a team. "Sophie." His voice was flat. Cold. A tone I hadn't heard in years, not since I'd refused to co-sign a loan for one of his more ludicrous business ventures. It was a voice stripped of all warmth, all history. "I need you to listen very carefully. Uncle Edward passed away." My heart sank. Edward was a distant, almost mythical figure in Richard's family. A wealthy, eccentric recluse living in a sprawling chateau near Bordeaux. We had only met him once, at a tense family gathering a decade ago. "Oh, Richard. I'm so sorry." "Don't be," he cut me off. The coldness in his voice was now laced with something else, something sharp and metallic. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. "He left me everything. The entire fortune. We're talking about $800 million. I was floored. The number was so vast it was meaningless. It was like trying to imagine the distance to the moon. It was a number for other people, for headlines, not for us. "What? Richard, are you serious? How is that even possible?" "Deadly serious," he said, and I could almost hear the arrogant smirk forming on his lips. "And things are going to change. Fast. My life is about to take off, and frankly, you're not part of the new flight plan." The metaphor was so corporate, so impersonal, it felt like a slap. "Flight plan? Richard, what are you talking about?" "We're married." He corrected, the word a scalpel, surgically severing 15 years of shared life. "I'm talking about a divorce, Sophie. I've already had the papers drawn up by a top lawyer. I want you to pack your things and be out of the apartment by the time I get home. Immediately." The sterile silence of my office suddenly felt suffocating. The neat columns of numbers on my screen blurred into meaningless squiggles. 15 years. 15 years of me working late to cover our bills. 15 years of me encouraging him after each failure, telling him his big break was just around the corner. 15 years of me making myself smaller so his ego could have more room to breathe. All of it, erased in a 30-second phone call. "Just leave?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. My entire world was tilting on its axis. "That's what I said," he snapped, his patience, which I had so carefully cultivated for over a decade, now completely gone. "My new life is waiting. Don't be a dead weight." The line went dead. I just sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. It was the loneliest sound in the world. It was the sound of my world ending. I knew I had to go home. I had to see the man who had just fired me from my own life. The drive home was an exercise in forced composure. My mind, usually so orderly, was a chaotic slideshow of our life together. I remembered our wedding, a small, simple affair because that's all we could afford. I remembered him laughing at my 5-year financial plan, calling me his adorably cautious little accountant. I remembered the sting of his words, year after year, chipping away at my confidence. It's just a job, Sophie. It's not a career. It's not a passion. He never understood that my passion was for stability, for building something real, something that would last. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as the memory of Uncle Edward's visit came back, sharper this time, more detailed. Richard had been insufferable, a peacock strutting around, dropping buzzwords he'd learned from a business podcast. He'd cornered Edward, trying to talk about stock portfolios and venture capital. Edward had listened with a polite, impenetrable smile before excusing himself. Later, I'd found Edward on the veranda, looking out over the garden. I'd brought him a glass of water. We started talking. He didn't ask about Richard. He asked about me. He asked about the challenges of my profession, about the ethical dilemmas an accountant faces. We talked for nearly an hour about regulations, about corporate responsibility, about how numbers can be manipulated to tell lies. He listened with an intensity that made me feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. A good accountant is the conscience of a company, he'd said. It's a profession with a deep moral core. Before we left, he'd pressed a small, heavy object into my hand. It was a beautiful, flawless crystal paperweight. For your desk, he'd said, his eyes twinkling. To remind you that clarity and integrity are the most valuable assets. Never let anyone compromise them. I still had it. It sat on my desk at home, a silent, solid presence in a life that suddenly felt like quicksand. This memory, so out of place, felt like a strange sort of prophecy. I shook my head, trying to focus. I pulled over and called my sister, Emily. My voice cracked as I told her what happened. He did what? She shrieked, her voice a protective roar of pure fury. That ungrateful, parasitic worm. I'm coming over. No, wait. You come here. Right now. Don't you dare spend another second in that apartment with that monster. Pack a bag. Just the essentials. Your laptop, your important documents, and that hideous painting of a boat he loves so much? Leave it. We'll figure out the rest. Emily had never liked Richard. She'd always said he was a man who stood in the shade of a tree he never watered. Hearing her voice, so full of righteous anger on my behalf, was the first anchor in my storm-tossed sea. It was permission to be angry, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel yet. When I walked through the door of our apartment, it felt like a stranger's house. The air was thick with a new, cloying scent, expensive cologne. Richard was there, pacing in the middle of the living room. He was wearing a new suit, a tailored, dark navy one I'd never seen before. It was the kind of suit he'd always browse online but complain he could never afford. On the coffee table, next to a bottle of champagne I knew cost more than our weekly groceries, was a crisp, white envelope. The divorce papers. You're here, he said, not a question but a statement of fact. He looked different. Taller, somehow. The familiar lines of his face were hardened into a mask of arrogance. His smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, calculating. They were the eyes of a man who had just won the lottery and was systematically cutting off everyone who knew him when he was poor. I got your call, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I refused to let him see me crumble. Good. Saves time. He gestured to the papers. It's all very straightforward. I had my lawyer make it clean. No alimony, you have your job, after all. We split our meager savings down the middle. You walk away. I've been more than generous, considering. Generous. The word was so absurd, so twisted, it was almost funny. I looked around the apartment we had built together. The scuffed wooden floors we'd refinished ourselves one long, sweaty weekend. The bookshelf I'd painstakingly organized by genre and author. The faint scent of lavender from the diffuser I always kept running to calm his artistic temperament. It was all being stripped away from me, and he called it generosity. 15 years, Richard, I said softly, a final plea for some shred of decency. Don't I even deserve a real conversation? An explanation to my face? He laughed, a short, ugly sound that echoed in the suddenly too large room. A conversation? Sophie, you and I have nothing left to talk about. Our worlds are no longer compatible. You think in terms of spreadsheets and balanced budgets. I'm about to enter a world of private jets, of boardrooms, of a different caliber of people. You wouldn't fit in. Your lack of ambition would be an embarrassment. There it was again. My lack of ambition. The phrase he'd used for years to chip away at my self-worth. The ambition that had paid for this roof over our heads. The ambition that had funded his last 3 failed startups. The ambition that had kept us afloat while he chased his fantasies. A hot flash of anger crawled up my neck, but I pushed it down, compressing it into a hard, cold diamond of resolve. He wasn't worth my rage. I walked to the table, picked up the pen, and looked at the signature line. My name. Sophie Dubois. Soon to be just Sophie again. I thought of the long nights I'd stayed up helping him with business plans, the family events I'd attended alone because he was networking. I thought of all the sacrifices, all the compromises, all the love I had poured into this man, this marriage. It all amounted to this. A cold signature on a legal document designed to discard me as efficiently as possible. Before I signed, I looked him in the eye. You know, I always thought your biggest fear was failure. I was wrong. It's being insignificant. And you think this money makes you significant. But it doesn't, Richard. It just makes you rich. I signed it. A clean, decisive stroke. I looked up at him. Enjoy your new fortune, Richard. He seemed momentarily taken aback by my composure, but quickly recovered, his sneer returning. Oh, I will, he said. Now get your things. I have a real estate agent showing me a penthouse overlooking the Eiffel Tower in an hour. Time is money, you know. He held the door open and gestured impatiently as I walked out with a single overnight bag, leaving 15 years of my life behind. As the door clicked shut, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a strange, chilling sense of clarity. The man I had married was gone. Maybe he had never really been there at all. The first night at Emily's was a blur of shock and wine. She let me talk, let me cry, let me sit in stunned silence. She didn't offer platitudes or false hope. She just offered her presence, and it was everything. His biggest loss isn't the money he thinks he's getting, she said, her voice fierce. It's you. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of purpose. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but alongside it was something else, a cold, hard resolve. Richard thought I was a dead weight? He thought I had no ambition? I would show him. More importantly, I would show myself. I opened my laptop, its familiar glow a small comfort. For years, I had wanted to take an advanced certification course in corporate finance and risk management. It was a high-level qualification, the kind that opened doors to executive positions. It was expensive and time-consuming, and Richard had always talked me out of it. Why bother, he'd say. Your little accounting job is stable enough. Don't rock the boat. I found the course online. I looked at the tuition fee. It was steep. It would take a significant chunk of my half of our savings. For a second, I hesitated. The cautious accountant in me screamed that it was an unnecessary risk. Then I thought of Richard's sneering face, of being called a dead weight. I clicked enroll. I typed in my credit card information. I paid the fee. It was the first major decision I had made entirely for myself in a very long time. It felt like breathing again after being underwater for years. I spent the next 2 days buried in study materials. The first module was on forensic accounting, detecting fraud, untangling complex financial webs. It was a puzzle, and I was good at puzzles. I was reconnecting with a part of my brain I had let lie dormant for too long. The part that loved complex problems, that thrived on logic and strategy. It was exhilarating. Meanwhile, through the grapevine of mutual friends who were now awkwardly trying to navigate their loyalties, I heard about Richard's exploits. He'd thrown a lavish party at a high-end hotel, telling everyone about his massive inheritance. He'd put a non-refundable down payment on a brand new Porsche. He was living the life of a millionaire before the first dollar had even cleared probate. It was reckless. It was arrogant. It was so typically Richard. On the third day, as I was taking a break from studying, a courier delivered a letter. It was addressed to me, at Emily's address. The envelope was thick, creamy cardstock, with the name of a prestigious law firm in Bordeaux embossed in elegant gold script on the back. My hands trembled as I opened it. The language was formal, precise. It was a formal request for my presence at a meeting concerning the estate and final will of Mr. Edward Dubois. It mentioned my presence was essential for the clarification of certain testamentary clauses. My blood ran cold. Why were they contacting me? The divorce was fresh, but maybe not finalized in the eyes of the law. Was Richard trying to pull something? Was there some obscure marital law that entitled him to my future earnings, even my meager salary? I showed the letter to Emily. "This is weird," she said, her brow furrowed. "Testamentary clauses? Why would his uncle's lawyer contact you directly? You have to go." "But I'm going with you. You're not facing this alone." The train ride to Bordeaux was nerve-wracking. Every possible scenario ran through my head, each one worse than the last. Was Richard trying to claim I owed him something? Was this some legal trap to get me to sign away more rights? I clutched my purse, where I'd tucked the crystal paperweight for good luck. Its solid, cool weight was a small comfort in a world that had become flimsy and unpredictable. The law office was exactly what you'd expect. Old, imposing, and smelling of leather, polish, and generations of money. We were shown into a large conference room with a polished mahogany table that reflected our anxious faces. A stern-looking man in a perfectly tailored suit introduced himself as Monsieur Leblanc, Edward's personal lawyer for over 40 years. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, madam," he said, his tone formal and impossible to read. "I was surprised to be contacted," I said, my voice more stable than I felt. "My former husband, Richard, is the beneficiary of his uncle's will." Monsieur Leblanc adjusted his glasses. He looked at me with a neutral expression that somehow felt more intimidating than a frown. "That is what we are here to discuss. Mr. Dubois's will is unconventional. It contained certain stipulations, contingent clauses that needed to be resolved before the estate could be settled." My heart hammered against my ribs. Stipulations? Mr. Dubois stipulated in a private codicil that his heir must not only be a blood relative but must also demonstrate a character of integrity, prudence, and an understanding of the true value of wealth, not just its monetary figure, the lawyer continued, his voice even. As such, Mr. Dubois initiated a character assessment protocol prior to now. I stared at him, completely lost. A character assessment? Indeed. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. A test, if you will. He wanted to be certain his life's work would be a legacy, not a lottery ticket. However, there is someone who can explain this far better than I. He nodded towards a large oak door at the side of the room. The door opened, and Uncle Edward walked in. He was not a ghost. He was not dead. He was very much alive, looking dapper in a tweed jacket, a wry, apologetic smile playing on his lips. I gasped, a sharp intake of breath. Emily squeezed my hand so hard I thought my bones would crack. My mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. Sophie, Edward said, his voice warm and familiar, cutting through my confusion. It's a pleasure to see you again. Please, forgive the theatrics. It was, I assure you, a necessary evil. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, my mind a whirlwind of questions. You see, Edward continued, taking a seat at the head of the table, I've known for a long time that my nephew Richard saw me not as family, but as a walking bank account. I have no children of my own, and I couldn't bear the thought of my life's work, everything I built from nothing, being squandered by a greedy, foolish boy. So, I devised a test. He looked at me, his eyes kind but sharp, the eyes of a man who missed nothing. My lawyer informed Richard of my passing and the inheritance. I wanted to see what he would do. Would he grieve? Would he be prudent? Would he honor the woman who had stood by him for 15 years, the bedrock of his life? He sighed, a deep, disappointed sound. He failed. Spectacularly. He revealed his true nature with a speed and cruelty that even I found shocking. For the promise of money, he threw away the most valuable asset he ever had. He paused, and his gaze met mine, holding it. And you, Sophie. You, who he called unambitious. You, who he cast aside without a second thought. In our one conversation, years ago, you spoke with such passion about ethics, about responsibility. You understood that a balance sheet is also a story of a company's moral choices. You showed more grace, dignity, and integrity in the face of his cruelty than he has shown in his entire life. Monsieur Leblanc cleared his throat and slid a new set of documents across the table towards me. They were thick, bound in blue ribbon. According to the final, binding codicil of Mr. Dubois's will, which is activated by Richard's definitive failure of the character assessment protocol, the sole and undisputed heir to the entire Dubois fortune, all $800 million, the properties, and the controlling interest in Dubois Enterprises, is you, Sophie. The room fell silent. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was the validation. It was the stunning, earth-shattering realization that someone, somewhere, had seen my worth all along. The quiet dedication, the steady loyalty, the integrity Richard had mocked, this man, this practical stranger, had seen it and deemed it priceless. While I was processing this impossible truth, my phone, which I'd placed face down on the table, buzzed with a text from a mutual friend. I glanced at it. It was a picture. It showed Richard, on his knees, in the middle of a gleaming Porsche dealership, his face a mask of pure horror. The caption read, OMG, Richard's credit card was just declined for $1 million car. He's screaming at someone on the phone. He just collapsed. The test was over. His new life had evaporated before it had even begun. My new life, a life I had just started to build for myself on my own terms, was about to change in ways I could never have imagined. The first thing I did was block Richard's number. The barrage of frantic, desperate texts and voicemails that followed, a pathetic, escalating cycle of threats, apologies, and pleas, was a noise I no longer needed in my life. I didn't need a final confrontation. His own actions were his judgment. My silence was my victory. Edward was more than a benefactor, he became a mentor, a friend, the father figure I never really had. He was delighted to discover that my boring accounting knowledge was exactly what was needed to streamline his empire. He saw the sharp, strategic mind that Richard had tried so hard to smother. He invited me to his chateau, not as a guest, but as a partner. We spent weeks going over the business, and for the first time, I felt my professional skills were not just valued, but celebrated. He offered to formally adopt me, to give me the name that came with the fortune. I accepted. I became Sophie Dubois, not by marriage, but by merit. The next few years were a whirlwind of hard work and discovery. I didn't buy a penthouse or a sports car. The first major check I wrote was to pay off Emily's mortgage, a tearful, joyful moment that felt more valuable than any luxury item. The second was to establish a foundation. It's been 5 years now. The Du Bois Clarity Foundation, named for the paperweight that started it all, is my life's work. We provide seed funding, low-interest loans, and mentorship to women over 40 who want to start their own businesses. We invest in the unambitious dreamers, the steady-handed builders, the women who have been told they are past their prime. I get to see the look in their eyes when someone finally believes in them. It's a look I know well. We invest in women like me. I did find love again. His name is Antoine, a brilliant, kind architect I met while designing the new headquarters for our foundation. He loves me for my mind, for my passion, and for the terrible jokes I tell when I'm tired. He was drawn to my work before he ever knew the extent of my wealth. Our partnership is one of true equals, building something together. As for Richard? I heard he eventually paid off his debts after declaring bankruptcy. He moved to a small town in the north, got a modest job managing a local nonprofit, and married a schoolteacher named Julia. Emily saw him once, coaching a kids' soccer team on a Saturday morning. She said he looked content. Quiet. Smaller, somehow, without the bluster. I hope he is. I hope that losing everything taught him what truly has value. Sometimes, I look at that crystal paperweight on my desk in my large, bright office overlooking the city. It's a reminder. A reminder that money doesn't change who you are, it just magnifies it. For Richard, it magnified his greed and insecurity. For me, it magnified a strength I was only just beginning to realize I had. He thought $800 million would buy him a new life, but all it did was reveal the poverty of his character. And for me, losing everything was the only way I could truly gain it all. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It's still wild to think about how much can change in a single moment. I have to ask you guys, have you ever had a moment, big or small, that revealed someone's true, unexpected character? Let me know in the comments below, I'd love to read your stories. And if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe for more. It really does help.